All right, let's take a deep dive. Today, we're looking into something maybe a bit off the beaten path. 1 Chronicles chapter 25 from the Bible.
hmm It's one of those chapters, people often skim past, lots of names, lists.
Exactly. You're looking for the big stories, the battles, and suddenly there's this incredibly detailed list about, well, musicians, but it's way more than just a list.
It really is. It
Wow.
gives us this amazing snapshot of like a highly organized divine music ministry set up under King David. It shows how they structured things.
Right. So our mission here is to unpack that structure.
Mm.
What does this chapter actually tell us about how serious they were about music and, interestingly, prophecy in their worship?
And it uses that specific word, ministry. That's key. It wasn't just entertainment.
That term ministry really signals something official, doesn't it? A formal service. So let's jump in. Who's involved in setting this up? The chapter mentions King David, obviously.
Yeah, David's right there.
Head.
But also, interestingly, commanders of the army.
Which is fascinating. Military leadership involved in organizing worship music.
It does seem a bit unusual at first glance, but it shows maybe how integrated these functions were seen. Anyway, alongside them you have the key figures, Asaph, Heman, and Jeduthun. These are the heads of the main musical guilds or families.
And the text says they were set apart. What were they set apart for?
For, and this is the core phrase, the ministry of prophesying, accompanied by harps, lyres, and cymbals.
Okay, prophesying with instruments. That's not just background music.
Not at all. It suggests the music itself was, integral to the prophetic act, maybe inducing it, maybe shaping it. We don't know exactly, but they're deeply linked. And it's a formal ministry.
A serious undertaking. And the structure. Who is overseeing these main guys? Asaph, Jeduthun, Heman.
They were directly under the king's supervision, so it's tied right into the royal court.
Makes sense. And the chapter gives specifics about their roles too, right? Like Jeduthun.
Yeah, Jeduthun, it says, was prophesying with the harp specifically in thanking and praising the Lord. So you get music, prophecy, and worship all wrapped up together in his description.
And Heman gets a pretty significant title.
Oh yeah, Heman is called the king's seer.
A seer. So like a visionary. Someone receiving divine messages for the king.
Exactly, that's huge. The head musician is also the king's spiritual advisor, essentially. It underlines just how connected this music ministry was to, well, divine communication.
Wow. And doesn't it mention something about his family?
It does. It notes he had many sons and daughters. Given to him, it says, through the promises of God to exalt him. It kind of reads like divine approval for his role, maybe even for this whole setup.
So this is way beyond just having nice hymns in the temple. It's about integrating music with prophecy, with thanksgiving, with praise, even with royal council.
Precisely. The music seems to be doing real spiritual work here. It's functional, not just aesthetic.
Okay, let's talk scale, because the numbers here are pretty striking. How many people were actually involved in this specific ministry?
The text gives a really clear number, 288 men.
288. That's a lot of people dedicated just to music and prophecy.
It is. And crucially, they're not just counted. They're described as trained and skilled in music for the Lord.
Trained and skilled, so professionals, not just enthusiastic amateurs.
Right. This implies, serious training, a high level of expertise. This was a dedicated workforce for the house of God, as the text puts it.
288 specialists. When you think about the size of armies or other groups mentioned, this number, specifically for this role, it really highlights the importance they placed on it.
Absolutely. It suggests a significant investment of resources, time, training. It wasn't an afterthought. It was clearly central. Skill mattered for this sacred duty.
So how do you manage a group of 288 professionals? What was the organizational structure within the ministry?
Well, it seems to follow family lines. The 288 were organized under their fathers, the leaders tracing back to Asaph, Jeduthun, and Heman.
Okay, so family-based units.
Yeah, supervised by those main leaders who, as we said, were supervised by the king. So a clear hierarchy.
But then, within that large group, how did they decide who did what, or perhaps when? The day-to-day assignments.
This is where it gets really interesting. The text says they cast lots for their duties.
Cast lots, like rolling dice or drawing straws, sort of.
Sort of, yeah. In that ancient context, casting lots was often more than just random selection. It was frequently seen as a way to discern God's will, or at least ensure complete impartiality.
So using lots could suggest they wanted fairness, or maybe they believed the assignments were, in a way, divinely directed, avoiding internal politics, perhaps?
Could be. It definitely adds that layer. It suggests the process wasn't just about human choice or favoritism.
And it gets even more specific about who participated.
It does. It says young and old alike, teacher as well as student, were involved in casting these lots.
Teacher and student, young and old. That's remarkable. So it wasn't just the bosses deciding. Everyone was part of this process of assignment.
It seems that way. It suggests a kind of, well, maybe collective involvement in seeking this impartial or divine assignment, even within their established hierarchy.
It balances the top-down structure with this method that seems, on the surface at least, quite egalitarian in its application.
Right. And the results of the lots are recorded in meticulous detail. The chapter lists out 24 lots being cast.
24 lots. Oh, yeah.
And each lot didn't just assign one task to one person. Each lot corresponded to a group of 12 people described as sons and relatives from these lineages.
So 24 groups, each with 12 people. That adds up to the 288.
Exactly. 24 shifts, or maybe 24 specific roles or choirs. The text then lists the leader assigned to each lot. The first lot for Joseph of Asaph's family, the second for Gedaliah from Jeduthun, and so on, all the way through 24.
Wow. Listing all 24, the leader for each group of 12, the level of detail, the sheer organization it implies for a music ministry is just, wow, it's impressive.
It really underscores that this was a highly structured, systematic operation, probably some kind of rotation system to ensure continuous coverage for temple services. Nothing left to chance, it seems.
So let's pull back a bit. If we connect these dots, the 288 trained people, the specific leaders, the prophecy link, the seer casting lots, the 24 divisions, what's the bigger picture here? What does 1 Chronicles 25 tell us about ancient Israel under David?
I think it tells us that organized worship, especially the music and prophecy part, was incredibly central. It wasn't just a nice to have. It was a formal ministry needing serious investment.
Right, a major state-sponsored or at least royally overseen operation.
Exactly. It highlights the value they placed on skill needing trained people, on structure, the hierarchy, the divisions, and even on process using lots for assignments, which might point to ideas about fairness or divine guidance. It shows how deeply intertwined religious practice and, well, administration could be.
It definitely pushes back against any idea that ancient worship was just, spontaneous and unstructured. This is meticulous. So why should you, listening today, care about these old lists of musicians?
Well, because it's a fascinating window into the practical side of running a major religious institution back then. It shows that things like skilled personnel, clear leadership, systematic processes, things we think about in organizations today, were vital thousands of years ago for something as seemingly spiritual as worship music.
It makes the house of God feel less like an abstract concept and more like, well, an actual functioning organization with staff and procedures.
Absolutely, with operational needs that were clearly taken very seriously, enough to be recorded like this.
Okay, let's nail down the key takeaways from this dive into 1 Chronicles 25. What are the essential points?
Okay, first point, I'd say. Music and prophesying weren't just activities, they formed a highly organized official ministry.
Got it. Formal ministry. Second.
Second, the scale was significant, 288 people, specifically described as trained and skilled. So expertise and investment were key.
Right. Trained and skilled. Third takeaway.
Third, clear structure. A hierarchy from the king down through the main leaders, Asaph, Heman, Jeduthun, to the family groups.
Textures.
And fourth,
The method for assigning duties casting lots involving everyone, distributing the work across 24 specific groups, suggesting a concern for impartiality or divine direction in the process.
it's that combination, isn't it? The resources, the skill, the structure, the unique assignment method, all focused on this blend of music and prophecy.
Yeah, it shows just how integral this was thought to be for the temple, for the house of God to function properly. It wasn't fluff, it was core business.
This chapter, 1 Chronicles 25, really does paint an unexpected picture of an incredibly organized, professional, and spiritually charged musical ministry.
Certainly makes you rethink the scale and the sheer intentionality behind worship practices in that time. It wasn't casual. So as we wrap up, what does this mean for you? Here's something to chew on, a provocative thought. Why record this level of detail? What does the act of meticulously listing the organization, the numbers, the skills, the leaders, and even the method of casting lots for musicians and prophets tell us about what this ancient culture truly valued? What does it suggest about the perceived importance of structure, skill, and maybe even that idea of impartiality, right within the heart of their spiritual practice and national identity? Why was this detail about musicians worth preserving so carefully?